Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum virtually. I would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum stands is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. As Ryan said, my name is Michael Reichley Lancaster. My chosen pronouns are he, him, and I am the very proud Executive Director Curator of the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. The Mississippi Valley Textile Museum collects, preserves, and tells the stories of the millworkers and the local labor history, while offering an open, inclusive space for the local community and visitors from across the globe. Through contemporary textile and textile-themed art and historical interpretation and programs, the museum conserves and interprets the industrial heritage of the Mississippi Valley. I am proud and honored to have had the opportunity to work with Eliakim Hawi. Eliakim is passionate about preserving and sharing cultural heritage. He grew up in a rural community in Kenya. He watched as shifts in technology made some elements of their culture quietly become obsolete. As a passionate photographer, he began to document some of these artifacts in the hopes of one day creating a digital repository of images and stories about his culture. He had the opportunity to build on his knowledge and skills throughout his 6 years of work with Digital Divide Data, a global social enterprise that supports a variety of digitization projects from legal or newspaper records to entire museum collections. From his Digital Divide Data work at the National Museums of Kenya, I welcome Eliakim Hawi to present his experience working in museums in Kenya, to his 2020 immigration to Canada, to his project Woven History, a virtual photography exhibit at the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. Welcome, Eliakim.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for that introduction. And thank you everyone for making time to be here with me today for this event. So to start with, I think Michael has given a lot about information about me. So that is more of an introduction. So, and to those who do not know me or who are meeting me for the first time again, my name is Eliakim Hawi, and I'm deeply passionate about preserving and sharing cultural heritage. And I grew up in a small village in Kenya, and with so much nostalgia, I remember every bit of my childhood, and I joke about it because I know I could write about sorry, I could write a book about it. I remember playing around the granary, and we were surrounded by weaving, like the baskets we used to carry and just about everything. From the granaries to the houses we lived in, all were woven, and the weaver birds built their intricate nest on trees right in front of our house. And our kitchen was separate from the main house. And I know that might be a little bit strange to the North American context, but that's how it was. So the kitchen was separate, and our kitchen roof was grass touched, carefully woven out of twigs and sisal before carefully again laying grass on top. Instead of a jug in the fridge, which is what is here, we drank water from a big clay pot, and it kept it really cool. And I watched as shifting technology and culture made some of these things just become, obsolete and disappear. Every single trip to the village made me really sad. Everything that we used to see while growing up was just disappearing. And I thought, I could use my passion as a photographer to document some of this stuff and creating a digital repository where future generations can be able to refer back and see how did my grandmother used to do this kind of things. And I even think about our future kids, like will they even be able to believe some of our stories or my stories? And one of them that my lovely wife Erin finds really interesting is my story of playing with an 11-foot python on my way from school. So pythons are really huge snakes that become immobile after swallowing food. So like they did to a goat. So they used to swallow a lot of our goats. We used to, every time we go to untie the goats, one would be missing. And I mean, we used to live around wild animals, so and python was one of those that used to swallow goats. So I would play around with pythons on our way from school, and unfortunately, some of these things were never documented. But believe you all, I played with a python. Anyway, you might be wondering how I went from documenting clay pots in granaries and weaving in Kenya to now doing the collections at the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. So long story short, I fell in love, and as they say, love makes you do some all sorts of unexpected things. So I married my wife, who is a Canadian, that is in 2019, and we knew we wanted to spend some time in Canada eventually, but when the pandemic happened, it turned our careful plans upside down. So the Canadian High Commission had been writing to Erin, encouraging her to return to Canada, but she told them that she was going to stay in our home in Nairobi. And then after a few emails here back and forth, they were urgently processing my visa, and we were realizing that we only had less than 24 hours to pack our lives and get to the airport before it closed entirely. And that was due to the COVID precautions. And Kenya was just shutting the borders. I literally had to call my mom at the airport to say that I was gone. I mean, it's to me, it's still unbelievable. It's like a fiction to me. So we had few major obstacles here and there, like the visa printer at the High Commission was broken, and the repairman was sound asleep somewhere in Ottawa due to the time difference. But I tell you what, even that couldn't stop our journey. So we landed in Toronto with only one suitcase between the two of us. And I only had two pairs of trousers and two shirts. Of course, we thought we'd be here for a month or two until the pandemic was over. But 2 years later, I'm a permanent resident of Canada and happily starting to build my career here in Ottawa. Again, as Michael had mentioned, I worked with digital divide data in Kenya, and I worked there for 6 years. And the project that I'm proud of in my 6 years that we completed in partnership with Amazon and Intel was the digitization of archaeology and paleontology, the largest archaeology and paleontology in the world at the National Museums of Kenya. So the National Museums of Kenya is the custodian of the Kenyan natural and cultural heritage, and it has over 10 million artifacts, fossils, and specimens. And its collection represents the longest record of human evolution in the world. And so our project included digitizing fossils of about 2.3 to 3 million years ago, as well as 2.5 million years of cultural evolution among humans. So I'm so happy that I've had a chance to continue using the skills that I gained during that project to support the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum in documenting their collection, and also to ensure that cultural heritage is preserved at Almonte, and as the same way that I was doing it at home. So that is something that I'm really happy about. So again, to my exhibition, which is the weaving history. How did I get to do it? So through a training program with the Social Planning Council of Ottawa under the leadership of incredible Dianne, I was granted an opportunity by Michael to intern at the museum. So the title of my exhibition again is The Weaving History, and I chose that because to me it just ties together the work at the museum with the imagery of the weaving that my grandmother and so many other women in the village used to do. So the baskets that my grandmother wove were made from sisal plants. And when mothers returned home with baskets on their head, it could only mean one thing. That was like good news. We knew there would be food in there. However, it would be cassavas or onions or tomatoes or sweet potatoes. Like there would be all sorts of food and just nice stuff. It was just, it brought me some hope just by seeing a basket on top of the head. So when I came to the museum, I learned a lot about the history of the woolen textile, and my exhibition will cover some of this. So I have a lot of photos. I've taken over 300 photos at the museum, and with all the collections, but I'm just going to give you a little bit while I'm talking about the history of the museum, where we have the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. This is the bell. And imagine like being asleep and you get woken up by a bell in the morning. So this bell is what used to summon the employees of the mill to work. And this bell is also at the museum. And so the next thing is the door here. So this has been kept the same way it was. And this was the president's office. And as you can see on the door, it's written private. And so I will give Michael a chance as we get into the president's office to say something about this office here.
So yeah, this is the president's office of the mill. And in that space, you can see many, many exciting original features, from the original pressed tin ceilings to, as Eliakim mentioned, the doors that say private, and similar desk and furnishings throughout that space to recreate what it had looked like. But also it's been repainted, and window dressings back to what would have been original. So it's very much a period room, but also very interesting because it's right as you enter in the building, and to the left is that president's office. Very different from businesses nowadays, where the president would be hidden somewhere in a top floor and you wouldn't know how to get to that said person or find them. Whereas here, he was very much front and center, as kind of, I guess, an intimidation factor. And certainly there was anxiety amongst workers of even entering the building, because usually that meant they were in some sort of trouble, either reduced pay because they were late or something along those lines.
Thank you so much, Michael. Next here is the ship. And so this ship is equally at the museum. And even though it has an interesting history, this ship was used specifically for wool and for food. So in the Lana County, this type of sheep was kept for the wool. But again, the reason why they did have sheep was because of the terrain of the land. So the land wasn't really good for crop farming, but they would keep sheep, and the sheep was able to survive in those bad terrains. And then the rest of the land that was good, they would use that for crop farming. And so, of course, there is no history of weaving without these sheep here. The sheep would be sheared, and the fleece washed, and then the wool transported into these bins here at the museum. And then the bins should be put into the elevator over here. As you can see from this elevator, it's an old elevator. And even by looking at it, the kind of wood just tells you of how rich our forests were back then. The entire museum, like the interior of the museum, is made of wood, and even the floor, and it's so incredible. And after that, the wool would then be put into the weighing scale here. You can see how it looks. It looks pretty old. This was used at the museum to weigh the wool. And after that, the wool would go into the next phase, which was to be washed and then dyed. And after that, they would do the cutting. This is one of the cutting machines that is at the museum, but was used by at the mill then. So this is a cutting machine which was supposed to ensure that wool is aligned. So this is also one of the cutting machines. And then after that, we have the winders and the twisters. This is a photo that I took the Museum of the Winders and Twisters, which was then to put the wool, which was being done into threads. And then they were supposed to be winded into these bobbins here. So the wool would be done into bobbins. So this is one of the photos I took at the museum. This is now the thread on the bobbins ready to be used. This was done differently because we have the looms, which were used for making the rag or just making some kind of clothing. And this is a boat shuttle, which is used on the loom. I will invite Roberta, who is one of the volunteers at the museum currently working on the loom, and I really admire the kind of work that I've seen them do on the loom. I am going to invite Roberta to tell you something about the loom.
So the loom that you see here began its adventure in the Middle Ages. And depending on the source that you choose, it's either Indian or Chinese invention. The loom on its basic function is a frame, and it holds threads very tight. These threads are called the warp. A round beam was added to the back of the frame to hold a very long warp, and consequently, one beam was added to the front to hold the woven cloth. The invention of wooden frames, which are called shafts, with small wires that have eyes in the middle, they are called heddles. They vastly increased the amount of patterning that you could do. The addition of pedals or treadles at the bottom of the loom that can be tied to the shafts completed the pattern possibilities. When the treadles are depressed, a space in the warp opens and the shuttle carrying the weft thread can pass through, thus making cloth. Though developed in the Middle Ages, the looms that we use today are basically the same. The loom that you see here is made by Leclerc, which is a Quebec company since 1906. And just as a little aside, in 1934, the Depression forced Leclerc to reduce the cost of the looms. So a 26-inch loom cost $34.23. A 36-inch loom cost $35.23. And a 45-inch loom cost $36.73, and that included taxes. Today, the cost of a loom is probably not much under $1,000. Many inventions have facilitated the efficiency of the loom to take it into the industrial level. The steam engine in 1786 enabled the first power loom. John Kay from Britain in 1733 developed a flying shuttle. Electric motors appeared to replace steam engines, and by 1940, looms were fully mechanical. And you can see examples of these looms at the Textile Museum.
Thank you so much, Roberta, for the explanation about the loom. The incredible volunteers working at the museum on the loom do a lot. And I would just like to mention again that currently we are doing a project with them whereby we are documenting and photographing some of the coverlets, some done like in the 1850s. And so it's a preservation project with the volunteers at the museum. And I'm really happy to work with Roberta and the other volunteers. Thank you so much, Roberta, for that. So I have this wider picture of the loom, as you can see, and you can probably see the warp and the weft, as mentioned by Roberta. And here is also another photo of someone working on the loom, trying to tie the warp. We have like industrial looms as well, but this is one of those industrial looms that were made in Britain, and it was imported to Canada to weave the Harry Street cloth. It was a manually operated shuttle. This one over here, as you can see, it looks pretty old, like something that you can only find at the museum. It was a mechanically driven loom, and it was donated by the Guelph Correction Institute, and it is the Crompton and Knowles loom. It is amongst the many collections at the museum. My intention from the exhibition that I built on this platform, it almost feels like you're walking around the room and pointing to each and every photo on the wall. And I had a bench, by the way, where I would sit and tell you all these stories. What have I learned from this? I have learned a lot from the museum, and I have learned that development of textile industry had a fundamental impact on the economy and population and architecture of the museum. the mills meant that every way of life for the people in Almonte was established into a pattern. And I love the architecture of the building, by the way, and the cozy feel of this little town. I bet many of you do not know this, but most Christmas movies are also filmed in Almonte. And last year I went to my usual sandwich restaurant, just hoping that I could grab my lunch as usual. And just before I stepped in, someone asked me if I was part of the crew that was filming the Christmas movie. I said no, but then it hit me that I just missed a chance on appearing on a Christmas movie. Anyway, I ended up missing my lunch and also missing that opportunity. Again, something some of you do not know about Almond as well. That is where James Naismith, the man who invented basketball, was born. And unfortunately, again, Canada only has one team in the NBA. So I would just like to say thank you everyone for attending and for walking this journey with me. And a special thanks to my top cheerleader, Erin. I know she's supporting me so much in this, and I can tell you that like the past few weeks, I've been working like 12 hours straight on the computer. And at some point I told her that I wanted to sleep on the couch just so that I don't interfere with her bedtime, but of course she declined. So thank you everyone, and thank you to my Lucknow family. Thanks to the best parts of friends and the museum staff led by Michael and Ryan, and also Celeste and Helen for all the drives. And also the people who are tuning in from Kenya and different other countries. I know some of you, it's past your bedtime, but you've been able to sit here and see this exhibition. All the pictures will be uploaded onto the website of the museum. And to the SPCO family, Ruben and Dianne, I can't thank you enough for all the support you've given me, and thank you so much. So at this point, I think I will yield the mic to Michael.
Thank you, Eliakim. So a couple of things I want to now follow up on. One, we will also have the virtual exhibition that Eliakim created on our website under our virtual exhibition section. And so we'll be working on that over the next few weeks to get that launched. Then we'll also be opening in about a month's time, give or take, we'll be opening our new permanent history exhibit called Material World on the Mississippi, taking you through step-by-step of industrial woolen processing, as well as hearing from mill workers on video of their experience working in a mill and the machines they worked on. So in closing, I'd like to just thank Eliakim Hawi, Roberta Morant, and the museum volunteer weavers and the museum staff. But most of all, Dianne Urquhart, Executive Director, Social Planning Council of Ottawa, for making this exceptional project and experience happen. Thank you. And so now I open the floor. If there's any questions, or if there's questions in the chat room or comments people would like to make, we can certainly open the floor for that now.
How many textile mills were in Almonte at the height of the textile industry's days?
There were 8 woolen mills in the heyday in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Almonte alone. And throughout the Mississippi Valley, there were over 20 mills.
And so a lot of sheep production in that area, obviously, to produce for the mills?
Yeah, certainly there was. And it depended on the mill, because the Rosamond Woolen Company, where the museum is housed, they mainly imported fleece from other countries like New Zealand and used merino, which couldn't grow in this or live in this climate. So they used different woolens from warmer climates.
And my last question, and then I'll let somebody else speak. Eliakim showed a picture of the sheep there, and what kind of sheep would that have been? Not that it makes any difference. I'm not a sheep expert anyway. I just wondered if it was a certain sheep known to that area.
To be specific, the sheep that was in the photo was a breed called Cumberlands that
That's
come
right.
from northern Scotland.
It's interesting that the Almonte area is still a source for a wide range of fleeces, and one can go out to Carlton Place to the wool growers co-op and pick out fleece if you wish to take it home and scour it and spin it yourself, so that the history is very much alive.
That is correct, Catherine. Thank you for that. And as a quick sidebar for everyone, just to show how much the industry matters to Ontario especially, there are now a number of co-ops that are opening towards Kingston and Southern Ontario area that also have their own small scale woolen mills. So that's something to keep an eye on as well that we're looking into.
And that Cumberland sheep that was in the presentation is also on long-term loan from the Carlton Place Wool Growers Association.
And I do see a question in the chat here. Where were the textiles exported to? Mostly local, or did they make it quite far? I can actually answer that one myself. Depending on the years, especially more towards the turn of the century, a lot of the textiles that came out of the Rosamond Mill especially, but as well as the number of local mills such as those owned by the Wiley family or the Thoburns, were exported across Canada and internationally. Some of the textiles that were created in the Mississippi Valley specifically were, as I know some of us may have in our cottages, for local at least, extremely well-made Ontario blankets. And for a time, all Army uniforms were created within the Mississippi Valley through government contracts, especially at the Rosamond Mill. So it all depended on exactly which mill we were looking at, which depending on your time period was up to 50 actually throughout the valley, but they did have international markets.
Another interesting fact about the Rosamond Woolen Company, where the museum is located, it was actually one of the largest woolen mills in Canada for 40 years of its existence. So the sheer size of the building and what they were producing and winning awards across the world for their production.
Could you speak, Eliakim, to how you combined the programming aspect or platform with your photography as shown on the screen now?
So I was able to build this room. So this is the journey that I would have given from this room. So if I wanted to talk about the weight scale, I would just go onto it. What I did is I combined, of course, my IT skills. It's a lot more of IT than I thought. I mean, combining my IT skills with my photography to be able to build this kind of a room that would give the kind of virtual tour that I wanted you all to be able to experience. I'm also trying to use technology, the same technology that is making some pieces of my culture and our culture obsolete, to be able to preserve that pieces of our culture. We are losing out on our cultural heritage, but I am trying to use technology to be able to preserve that for the future generation and even for researchers to be able to have access to that.
Hi there. Thank you, Hawi, so much. This presentation has been really interesting. I know nothing about this space, so I've learned a whole lot today, and your photos are incredible just from, showing the majesty of the president's office and really capturing that to, just how big the looms are, and the photos have been fantastic. Through your experience, what did you learn about this industry or the heritage of Almonte that really kind of maybe surprised you, or what did you find most interesting through this entire experience and program?
I've learned a lot by just being with the work in Almonte, being able to learn about how the mill affected the people, both socially and economically, and just looking at all their lives. Like by the mill being in Almonte, it created a pattern for the people living there. They knew they had to be up by 5 a.m. in the morning, and just being able to compare that to my home where I grew up in. My grandmother and many other women just used to do all the weaving, and that also affected their lives, what it meant to them in terms of the social life. I have learned a lot about the social life of the people who worked at the mill, and that is one of the most important things. Even how employees were treated, working on those big machines. These cutting machines were really huge, and some of them were causing accidents. Like I think the people who were pulled into the machines, they didn't tie their clothes nicely. By then there were not a lot of safety precautions, and some of them got pulled into the machines, and those kind of accidents which weren't really good. And even how employees used to be treated. There was only one gate, by the way. So they say the punctuality was taken as the number one thing at the factory. And if you arrived late, there was only one way in. And so that means you had to go through the office of the clerk, and they would be penalized for that. I doubt that the mill really wanted to know why they were late. So it just tells you a lot about, how life was then and how the mill employees were treated.
Are there examples of blankets and other textiles made in Almonte at the museum? We do have a number of examples of some of the fabric that was made, especially at the Rosamond Woolen Mill, as we were lucky to have donated a made quilt using scraps from soup material and others that are currently on display now in the museum.
We also, years before I started working here, there was a book found in the rafters when they were doing renos that actually is full of samples of what was made at the Rosamond Mill. Whatever someone's foresight was to hide that book in the rafters, but we luckily did find it at one point. And so some of our weavers actually studied some of those pieces and rewove larger samples of those. And those are also on display, just to give an example of the kind of things that were woven here. And in the early years, a lot of it was tweeds and worsteds for pant and suit material.
Why were there so many mills in the community in the first place?
Just the right people that came here from Scotland, Ireland, England, who were working in mills in those areas, and then moved to Canada when the big moves started to happen to come to Canada. And when they did come, they just saw the natural resources and water, and certainly in Almonte and other areas around here, it's a very hilly area with lots of really big waterfalls. And so they utilized that natural power and redirected some of it to make these mills operate, and built mills then at those areas. And that really was it. It was the natural resources that made it for them an obvious choice to build up their industry.
Are any of the looms at the museum still used? And if so, what are they being used for? Yes, there are still looms being used at the museum. Many of the hand-woven pieces that we do carry downstairs in our gift shop are actually made on looms, such as the one that is on screen right now. And many of our amazing volunteers create absolutely stunning works of art that come off of these looms, and you can see the love and attention to detail in every single one.
Some of these rugs that have been made from the looms at the museum are at the museum gift shop, and those who can make a trip to the museum can be able to buy them, or even at on the website, some of these rugs are there, and you can be able to buy them and support the museum and the incredible volunteers who are doing that.
I know you had mentioned the price of one of these things is now, I guess, appreciated to about just a little under $1,000. So if you ever wanted to buy one and maybe start your own business, where would be the best place to purchase one of these?
There are several firms now that are making looms. It kind of depends on what kind of loom you want. In Canada, we have Leclerc, who is still in the business of making looms. In the United States and California, ABL is very large. In Europe, there is Schacht, and they do actually import. They have sales reps here in Canada. So there is still quite a variety of looms. Another loom from the United States is really good, is the Macomber.
I really do enjoy all I've seen and heard. I did not know much about the history. So the walkthrough, as well as the inputs and commentaries were amazing. I am really looking forward to visiting it, and who knows, maybe in person as well, right? So just wanted to say big thank you, and thanks for inviting us for the space and for knowledge.
I'm just wondering if you have examples, or if there were labels that were put on these older products, or if you have samples of the labels that might have been used over time.
Unfortunately, most of the fabrics, the company label was not put on any fabrics that we've ever seen, because generally it was other companies were ordering the fabric, purchasing it, and it was going to that company, and then their label would go on it once they tailored the fabric into the suits or pants. So we generally haven't seen fabric with the actual labels on them.
Oh, how interesting. So was the mill then making mainly yardage? And
Yes.
do you know where that yardage, so that I know you did discuss where the yardage might have been sent, but would there have been companies in particular that might be available if we were visiting the museum, the names of the companies that might have purchased the yardage, not just where they went?
Yeah, and certainly we do have some evidence, and we're certainly doing a lot more research down the road to really find all the links, and especially since the factory ran for over 100 years. It's trying to get that full timeline and so many companies, but certainly we also acquired a few years ago original shareholder documents from when the mill was starting, and Hudson Bay Company had shares in the company. The head of the railway had shares. So you certainly saw where the large connections are from. So I can assume Hudson Bay Company would have been a partner and maybe purchased or ordered fabric. Also, one can start to think of other tailoring companies if it was pant and suit materials. So you could think maybe Tip Top Tailor. Maybe there's some companies like that more than likely And it's going to take a lot more that part of the research. Right now, we're currently researching. I have an intern B who's researching kind of the timeline of all the mills in the valley and looking at how many there were, then documenting who owned and operated, what they produced in general over the years, and then how many workers they had. And then the next step I want to have researched is then looking at the companies where these products went to and what they were ordering and what they were being made into.
Oh,
And certainly
thank
it'll
you.
take quite a bit of research going through to different universities, but also city archives like in Montreal and Toronto, because they certainly, Montreal was a big area that the owners of the mill had properties up in that way too. So we can assume Montreal was a big player. So it'll take some really digging into to find where things were going from here.
That's so interesting. Thank you. This has been so enjoyable. And I must say that I really appreciate the fact that you showcase the individual workers. I really like that part. But I'm wondering, is there a book about the history of the mills or that might be available for purchase?
We have had several different books. And there's one book, and I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but there's one on mills of Canada, and certainly the Rosamond Mill is featured in there. But what we're planning on doing is some future publications. We're utilizing some of this research that we're currently doing will be in future publications. I'll give more of a thorough detail of the mill industry in this region.
One of our interns, Ellen Carter, has mentioned the publication Mills of Canada by Carol Priamo from 1976. However, I know one of our bases for a lot of the research in the industry is study the primal textile industry in Canada by A.B. McCullough, which is actually published through the National Historic Sites Publications and Environment Canada. That does show a in-depth amount of information regarding both the Rosamond Mill as well as other large textile mills throughout Canada.
Thank you. This has been most enjoyable. Everyone involved, I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Which photo is Eliakim's favorite photo and why?
This is my favorite photo because I captured it at the museum. And it has all the details I need. It just shows you how careful she is separating the wove. And that is all about, weaving. You have to be really careful with how you handle your stuff. And just thinking about even my grandma and many other women back in the village in Kenya, when they did the basketry using the papyrus reed and the papyrus plant and the sisal, they had to be careful and know which goes where the sisal goes and at what point, and by just looking at this photo, it reminded me everything about, weaving and even about the weavers. And so by just looking at this photo, it tells me everything about weaving and how it has to be according to plan. You don't want to miss any one of them. You don't want to put a thread into the wrong harness. It has to go into the right harness. And if they have to be 10, then only 10 has to go into that harness. I would say this is my favorite photo.
Roberta, when you do the weaving on the loom, how long, like to do a foot of weaving, how long would it take to do that?
So that question is very hard to answer because there are so many variables. How many threads to the inch do you have? How fine is your thread? The finer your thread, usually the longer it takes. The thicker your weft, the shorter it takes. It depends on what you're weaving.
Thank you so much, Eliakim, for inviting all of us. This was fantastic to see all of your photography on display like this.
Just again, a final thank you. We're so proud to showcase what we do here and to have a diverse group that do work here at the museum and to have welcomed Eliakim to do this wonderful project. And he's not done yet. We have some more photography for him to do. So it's not over. We're not letting him go quite yet. So thank you so much. And congratulations, Eliakim. Great project, great presentation. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for spending your part of the afternoon with us. We wish you all a good day. Thank you.